John, that operate in supporting outside of the official administration through grassroots efforts, outreach, navigation, awareness, and troubleshooting. And I wanted to just share that because I wanted you to kind of have these ideas in mind as we go through these questions. So, first up, Kim from Utah, I want you to share, based on your experience with offering your unconventional model of homeschool with a charter school at Canyon Grove, can you talk about the response from opposition and how they're feeling maybe threatened by this other model that's taking public funding, and what that looks like in navigating your opposition?
Yeah, the opposition has been a big part of my journey, and I was fascinated at first because at first I came into this, built a program. My authorizer is the State Charter School Board of Education. That means that they can shut me down at any time they want to, okay? So lots of power they had over me and what I was doing. So when I first created the program, I didn't have a lot of opposition, but I was small. And then I started being consultant and going around and consulting other schools and showing them how to create a hybrid model of education. And every school I went to, interestingly enough, right after I went to them and started talking to them, the state would appear on their door and start attacking them. And they got rid of me, the state stopped attacking them. So it was pretty interesting, and that happened multiple times until I landed at the school I was at. And so I stayed put for a minute and built my program. And it was quiet for about a year, and then I just got attacked viciously. And by then, I mean, I'm a people pleaser. I don't consider myself very much of a, Jamie's much better at that than I am, about fighting the fight. I don't consider myself to be a fighter. But I was backed into the corner. I was backed into the corner that I was going to kill my charter school, which meant, again, I was attached to all my families and attached to what I was doing, and it was my heart. My heart was on the line. So they backed me into a corner, and so I came out fighting. And the fight for me was I had to get connected. I had to build relationships. I had to find the people in the right seats who would back me. And as time went on, I realized that they were just scared. They were scared of what I was doing. They did not understand what homeschooling meant. They didn't understand the power of education that we provide for our children. They just did not understand. And then, so as I sat them down one-on-one, took them out to lunch and talked to them and really built those relationships and helped them to see what I was doing and why I was doing it, they started getting excited about that. And they went from, we are shutting you down immediately, to, you know what, this is actually a curious thing that you are doing. I actually had one of the State Charter School Board of Education staff members in a public meeting say, well, it's not up to the parent. The parent has nothing to do with education. It's not up to the parent. He was shut down really fast and disappeared from staff after that. But I think that's where they were backed into the corner too, and had that realization moment of, you know what, we are about parent choice and we should start backing this school. And so after 10 years of fighting them, everything has changed, and now the they, them who have the authority to shut me down are actually backing what I'm doing and saying, you know what, Kim, we believe that you are the future of education and we love what you're doing and we want you to help others to learn what you're doing. And so I've gone from over here to way over here, and I'm still, I don't know. It is very interesting to be in the good books instead of in the bad books, because I've been in the bad books for so long. But I think my point is that it's what we were saying before. It is really about relationships, but it's about understanding they're not the enemy, and why are they doing what they're doing, and why are they fighting against us? And it really is a lot of times that they're just scared. And if we can help them and help them understand their fears and help them understand the reasons why we are doing it, I think that's when we really start to win the battles.
I heard a couple things from that. Then the tenacity and the persistence, that believing in what you're doing. And if you truly believe in what you're doing, then you're willing to paint the picture for others to see, and that could be your opposition. And I think that's why the work that Carrie McDonald does and the National Microschooling Center does, that's why it's so important, because they are painting the picture of what unconventional education looks like, and that's very important for lawmakers and government agencies to see. Missy, you launched your school, as I was saying, in the middle of microschool legislation becoming law and in the middle of an injunction on the Hope Scholarship. And so we had plenty of people in West Virginia who were feeling like we were diverting funds from the public school
Yeah.
system. So can you talk a little bit about, or describe how the opposition behaved towards you and how you were able to manage that backlash?
Okay, so I definitely had an easier time than Kim, and that's because we already had other types of programming in our state. However, the big thing was you're taking money from the public school, and there's not going to be enough money to educate these students, and how are we going to do this? But the reality is we only got a portion of those dollars, and the other dollars that were left was way bigger than what our students were receiving. And they got that money regardless of whether that child was sitting in a seat in the public system or not. So then here they are, their classrooms are a little bit smaller, but they still have this money that they're supposed to be spending on the student to educate them, but they weren't having to spend it on that child because that child was in my school. So how did I deal with it? I pretty much ignored them. I would like to say that I have a really thick skin and nothing ever bothers me. It did bother me, I didn't want people talking negatively about myself or my school or any of the other educators within the school. However, you have to keep your face for them, and you just hold your head high, and you know that what you're doing is a good thing, and it's a great thing for kids. And I would just talk to people. It's really important to have kind of a person like Jamie that you can consult all the time.
All the time.
All the time. Cell phone, it says that she has her thing silenced or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I'll just deliver it quietly, and that she'll get to it tomorrow morning or whatever. But I just shoot her texts of questions and things, and, she just had a way of like saying, well, that's just because of this, and you're going to be fine, and it is fine. And so having somebody that you can talk to about like some of the things that are being said and if those really matter or not is important, but just growing a thick skin and saying, do I feel that the mission and vision of this organization is the right way to go? Is this what is going to provide the best for the students that want to come to our school? And if you can say that down deep and know that it is truth, it just is what it is. You just have to kind of let it go.
So I want you to just picture some of the best advice I ever got from someone in parenting was that, my child had a plate of food, of nutrients that they were to be nourished from, and by stepping in and doing things for them or helping them finish stuff when they really needed to finish it on their own, I was actually taking stuff off of their plate that was actually good for them. So I want you as a founder to think about what is currently on your plate. And for many founders, it's spilling over, right? Like you have all of these things on your plate that may or may not be good for you, and it's all on there. I want you to think about when you consider participating in an ESA, you are going to add additional items to your plate, and one of those is this backlash that is going to be received within your community. So I want you to think about when you're choosing to participate, do I have the bandwidth right now? And how can I strategically plan for the backlash that is coming? In Kim's case, with a charter school, that required more of a relationship with the government, with this authorizing board, and she had to plan and be intentional about building those relationships to be sustainable, to not be shut down. In Missy's case, with a micro school, that removed a lot of the government jurisdiction, so she was able to say, I'm going to ignore this and focus on what I'm building. And a lot of that has to do with the policy and the way that the policy is written. So John, I wondered if you could talk a little bit, you're so close with the educational entrepreneurs on the ground in Utah, and you see the frustrations, you see where they are, and as you mentioned with the zoning, you were able to pass legislation that helped them. But legislation doesn't always do exactly what we want it to do. And I think that I've witnessed school founders feeling frustrated that the policy didn't do this, or it allows the government to do this and they didn't want it to. So can you talk a little bit about how founders can navigate when the policy is frustrating?
I think that's a really good, thing for everybody to be thinking about. This idea of, organizing together as founders within your state to have a voice at the state legislature is a really important thing. Making connections with your state legislator is a really good thing. I would love to say that legislation is based on good policy all the time, but unfortunately it's more on like your relationships and who you know and how you can get that done. And so if you're able to band together and work together on a policy with legislators, there's SPN affiliate groups like what I work for at the Libertas Institute. I think there's one in every state. And so your state has a SPN affiliate and they have relationships with the legislators that you can leverage. But what they did in South Florida, organizing together, and although they're not necessarily always advocating for policy, but they're able to navigate it together and be like, oh, I did this. I was able to define myself as a learning pod in Georgia. That way I didn't trigger, educational occupancy for my building. Being able to have that shared knowledge and shared communication, I think, is a really important part of any group that we have. You don't have to do it alone. You can work on it together. And as far as policies go, I think that's an important thing too, because you can then show up as a unified voice. You'd be surprised at how having just 3 or 4 or 5 people show up to a bill that nobody was paying attention to and speak against it changes everything, and so being able to do those things, I think, is a very important part of what you can do as founders.
And can you talk a little bit about how many of you have studied economics through your education? Like you've actually studied it. Okay, I can't raise my hand. I'm just giving you an example, right? That language, that vernacular was completely new to me about 2 years ago when I started doing this work and learning about the free market and libertarians and their ideals. And then I'm down in the practical land here, not in the clouds, where we actually have to function. And sometimes there feels like there's a disconnect between that philosophy and those ideals and then what we can actually do and how we can do it on the ground. And recently in West Virginia, there was a micro school that closed, and whether or not you want to define it as a failure or not could be debated. But either way, I knew the school founder. I had spoken with the school founder. I had some hesitations about the school founder, and she launched a program. She took money from the ESA families, and in West Virginia, if those families leave your program, so you could charge for the full semester, but if they leave, you have to refund that. You have to give them that money back. She was failing to do that, and she got a legal notice of the Treasurer's Agency, or the Treasurer Department was looking to actually file criminal charges against her for fraud. The children were displaced, had to find new educational settings, and guess who was getting all of those phone calls and helping all of the families navigate their alternatives. So is it an example of the free market at work? Absolutely. Failure is an essential part to that. We should learn from that, but you also have to tell the horror stories. You have to talk about those failed micro schools and what that looked like and navigating in that program. And also, school founders should be equipped to know if you do not refund that money, you could be criminally charged, right? And then when we think about the competition in the free market, like if that school is not serving those families, the parents can now take their money and they can go somewhere else. So John, can you talk about competition in the free market and kind of this ideal of what we're working towards and why we do need to be comfortable when schools close and how maybe we can support those families when that happens?
Yeah, I think that's and any time a school closes, it's sad. It's sad for the students because maybe there were a couple students who wanted to stay, but all of a sudden you go from maybe 10 students to 2 students and you're no longer financially viable. And it's sad for those students. It is, but I think our opening session talked a lot about we can now learn from it. What was it that they did wrong that we can improve? And maybe it's not necessarily their educational model. Maybe it was the fact that they never kept their books and didn't pay attention to their accounting. Maybe it's because they didn't actually form a 501c3 all the way and didn't check all the boxes. And I need to make sure I do that when I start my process. But there's things to be learned from those failures that happen in the free market, and then you as education entrepreneurs can learn from that. Be like, okay, so they did X. I probably shouldn't do X because I can see that hurt them, right? And so that's the beauty of it, because the truth is that for the majority of schools, when they fail academically, they in the public system, they get more money, which is a different incentive, right? That's a very different incentive for those public schools, and they don't need to necessarily do anything too drastic because they're not in danger of shutting down, because it is, it's newsworthy when a school like that shuts down, when any school shuts down. And, sometimes people will point to it and be like, see, these micro schools will never work. Well, that one didn't work. We got to be very clear. We have to paint it as it is. And it didn't work for those parents, and they left. And that is far more accountability for a micro school founder, that danger of parents leaving than some test, right? Than some whatever is going to be far more, I think, motivating for founders to make sure that they're doing something that parents want.
So the founder of that school from West Virginia, she had reached out to me a few months before she launched, and I offer consulting on launching these programs, and it costs $600. And she said, we don't have the money, we can't do it. I can't afford to take your course. And then the moment she was served with these papers, I was the first phone call she made. And so who on the ground is working to support the founders, and how are these organizations supported? I run an organization that hasn't been funded for a year and a half. And so how are we supporting the groups like INED, what Shireen is doing in Southern Florida, what Delina is doing in Kansas? We need to ensure that we are supporting those networks on the ground, because there are going to be failed entrepreneur ventures within the education system. That is going to happen. But I would just wonder, how can we, from the grassroots side, from the community, with folks like John, supporting the entrepreneurs and educating them, educating the families. Mike McShane tweeted here a couple months ago, there's a responsibility, I think he had an article on it, there's a responsibility in educating these parents, because they've not had the purchasing power that we are now giving them. So your families that are choosing to now participate in your school, and you're choosing to participate in the state's program, they may not completely understand what they're signing up for. Those parents that were leaving that micro school in West Virginia were beside themselves. They had no idea what to do and how to navigate exemptions from compulsory education, and the majority of those kids went straight back into the public school system. Their families could not navigate homeschooling or an alternative option. So founders can be mindful of what is going to be expected, and just that additional bandwidth that you may need to deal with all of those issues. Kim, I wanted to hear more about, as we start talking about ESA participation, you have been running this charter network school, kind of your own network, in a lot of ways. And now you're going to participate in the Utah Fits program. Can you talk about what your experience is right now, since the time it's launched, wanting to participate? What has your experience been?
Well, it's very, very new. I don't really know what's happening with it a lot right now. I think for me, I made the commitment to jump in and do it simply because I believe in parents' right to educate their kids and to receive the funding in order to do it. And so I'm a big believer in that, so I just jumped in wholeheartedly and I'm going to do this. And so now that Charter School Board of Education is reaching out to me saying, we want to know how you're doing this and how it's working with our Utah Fits All Scholarship, because we want to be able to present it to other charter schools. And so I'm kind of leading the way in that, but I'm blind. I have no idea what's going on. John was able to connect me last week with the person who's managing that, and she's phenomenal. She lives just down the street from me, apparently, and is amazing. And so I have a lot of hope for what it's going to look like, a lot of faith that it's going to be amazing, but honestly, at this point in time, I really don't know. I'm telling my students to apply for it because I think they need to be heard too, and so I know I've got over 100 kids who have applied for it. But I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to be fun to see. But because I've done crazy stuff before, I know I can build a plane when it's flying. I've done it before, and so that's kind of what I'm doing. And it's still back to the fact that I believe in this. I believe in freedom of education, and so I'm just going to jump in and make it up as we go, and it will be okay.
Missy, you've got unique insight, again, launching your school in the middle of all the chaos that we were experiencing. And for many states that do not currently have a choice program, they can learn from West Virginia because we didn't have anything in place. Sometimes, you're expanding. In Florida, they were expanding what was already in place. In Arizona, they were expanding what was already in place. But in West Virginia, we didn't have anything, so it was incredibly new. So could you tell us about your experiences participating as a new provider? What were some of the challenges that you faced through that launch of participating?
Okay, so year one, we had only a handful of kids that had applied for the Hope Scholarship and received it, but we also knew that they were attending our school needing that scholarship. Outside of that scholarship, they did not have the funding to come to school. And so we start working in June, but it was August was the injunction,
July
right?
6th was when it hit.
Okay, July 6th. So now suddenly this handful of students could no longer come because there was an injunction and they weren't releasing funds as they said they would do in August. So that was a concern because, again, it was year one, so we only had somewhere between 40 and 50 kids. And I say only, and then I tell other people this, and they're like, what? You have 50 kids year one? It's just that's how much our state longs for and wanted programming that fit what they wanted for their children. And I think that speaks volumes about what our families want, which they just want more of a part of their child's education, and that's what our school was about to hand out. So anyway, that made me extremely nervous because that took our numbers down. We agreed to hire these people to do this job, and now our numbers are a lot less than what we thought they were going to be. We completely lost a couple of families, and then so we just had to we just had to kind of ride that wave. And so you need to be prepared for that, to know if you're opening a school very close to the time that this ESA program or whatever it is going to launch, there are going to be possible pitfalls, there are going to be possible mountains, and so you have to be prepared for that. I just looked for other funding opportunities. VELA was one of those. VELA doesn't know it. I want to stop by and tell them at the table, but they saved me that year because I needed that micro grant to get started, and I did not take out a loan to start our school. I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. It was such a new thing that I felt like, no, I'm not borrowing money. We're going to just do this. I started our checking account with a $20 bill out of my husband's wallet because neither one of us ever carried cash anymore. And I said, do you have any cash? Because I've got to open the account to be able, a couple of private people had given me a check for $100 or $300, and I didn't even have an account with that name on it. So anyway, that was scary. That was scary when that injunction happened. There was now year two, starting year two this past August. Then I got really squirmy because we doubled in size almost. We have 91 kids now, and half of them had the Hope Scholarship. So not just a handful, but literally 50% of our student body had the Hope Scholarship. And then it was, okay, I have bills to pay, and our first payment of the new year is August 31st, and funds dropped August 15th. So I needed money to pay even our first paycheck of the school year. We had to move to a new building. That started at the beginning of August, that new rent, which was over double what we paid last year. There were just things that you have to keep in mind, like these are our finances, this is the truth of the matter, and I've got to have this much money by August 31st in the account. And if you've ever done private schooling or whatever, you're always lowest in the summer because a lot of families will pay up front at the beginning of the school year. So then by the summer, things are a little tight, and I was very squirmy at that point. fact, I have an email that I sent to the treasurer's office saying, I'm very nervous, we have bills to pay. Are you telling me for sure that the money goes in their accounts on the 15th? Because I felt like I might need to change dates, or I might need to tell my staff, hey, you're going to be paid double in the middle of September instead of getting your first check on the 31st. There were just a lot of things that, and nobody really deals with that other than the founder. Like, that was all on me. And those were the types of things that kept me awake at night, because I knew how glitchy our system was that is providing for the Hope Scholarship. I guess you called it
That's
the
a good
program
word.
manager.
The program manager?
Yes, so the program manager of our scholarship is super glitchy, and I already knew that because of last year. And so I just needed assurance, and that's why I emailed the treasurer's office, and there is a woman there, thank goodness. I don't know how, I don't know if you got me with her, but she's listens to me. And you need to find that too. Find somebody who hears you and hears your concerns and is actually concerned with you. Because she reassured me, and she said, you just need to make sure that your parents know that in between, just say August 15th and August 20th, that they have to assign those funds to you, or they just maybe tell them that they won't be attending until that's done. And so it did work out, and I was squirmy, probably for maybe no reason, but I think you have to know that. You have to know that there are glitches, and what's plan B if that money doesn't go into our account.
Making the money flow is not easy in these programs. And so nobody feels it like the founder. I had one school founder that was waiting on $70,000 for over 4 months, to the point the program manager wired them the money and asked them to sign a promissory note that if it somehow popped up in their account through another transaction, they would return that $70,000. She had already taken out a second mortgage on her home in order to cover payroll. School founders need to know when these programs pass, there are logistical challenges and hiccups. You need to have, set your expectations. I always say, like, 2 things. I tell myself, don't generate what you can't sustain, and then don't set expectations you can't meet. And so I would be mindful of setting expectations for the ESA. Can it give you the funding you really need? Should you consider only, we were talking with a founder last night who said she caps it at 20% of her students can be participants in their ESA, but 80% have to be private pay, because she can't put all of her eggs into that basket. So thinking about the delays in the payment in those transactions, and also the uncertainty. Like she said, you don't know if these families can now participate because the injunction happened. So there's this whole litigation piece that happens after an ESA, or the potential for that after an ESA passes. So just trying to give you some bullet points here: the delay in payment, the uncertainty of participation, and how do you hire this additional teacher? Can you hire this additional teacher? I mentioned earlier you having to refund the payments. So how do you plan accordingly? You need to look into your ESA. And speaking of this, I've got the little note cards in the back. There's a 15 questionnaire, a download with 15 questions that I wrote to help you kind of frame this. You can take those questions and ask the government agency in your state or the leaders in your state these questions to try to get you the answers. The backlash from the public school system, how much bandwidth do you have to navigate that? Educating the families. We have a membership program with the West Virginia Few that Missy's been a part of. I think she might have been the first one.
The best thing I've spent money on in the last 2 years.
And so what she's able to do is when she has a family, like she's running a school, she can't stop and help the family navigate their application. So she is able to just loop them into an email thread with me, and I take them over and help them navigate their application process with her on that looped thread. So she's in communication, in the loop, on knowing what's happening. But what is your state offering to support both families and educating them on participating? Because if not, that's going to fall to the school. The parents parents see you as the resource for information? Do you have the bandwidth to do that? Also, something we talked about in preparation is what qualifying expenses are there. If you're not a school, how you participate may vary, and this question is included in that download. But are you a tutoring center? What do you tutor on? What do you offer? Are your services a qualifying expense? West Virginia operated for a year and a half without defining what wasn't a qualifying expense, and just recently they came out with a new promulgated list of rules. Now they are defining what is not a qualifying expense, and it hurt my heart to see that in writing, that they were now saying this is what we will not allow you to use the funds for. So we're going to kind of wrap it up here. Last question to each of the panelists, but Missy, maybe talk a little bit of just our relationship, how that support has helped you. What were the critical things you felt like you couldn't get the answers to that our support network helped you to find the answers to?
Okay, so there are special circumstances for every family that, so our particular school choice program says you have to be an incoming kindergartner or a student of the public school to qualify for the Hope Scholarship. And so, but there are special circumstances. I had a family, she was coming, this little girl was coming, but she needed the scholarship. However, she was a foster, but going to be adopted before school started, but not in time for the window of application for the Hope Scholarship. So that was where I don't know the answers to any of that. And I am running the school, and I also teach in my school. So I have 2 full-time jobs, and then I have, these special circumstances. And you would be surprised, you're going to be contacted by families probably once a week with a special circumstance going on, is that covered, is it not? I would start an email thread with Jamie. Her organization just helps with all of those types of things. I feel that every state should have an organization like that they can say, here's a resource for you. You might have to pay something for this resource, but it's a great resource. Our state, I think they are hoping that we just don't participate in the Hope Scholarship. That's what I think is, but it's well worth it to find somebody who knows the law, who knows the rules of the ESA that you're working with, that type of thing. So those are things that I don't have answers to, and they're looking at me like I'm going to be, the answer giver and the savior and going to be able to bring them to our school. And I don't have any of that power. And so those are certain things. We have multiple families this year. I've already brought Jamie in on who have questions. We have 91 kids this year. We have 131 enrolled for next year. But again, this Hope Scholarship thing has just changed the whole outlook in the state of West Virginia. Families know, I want something different for my children. COVID brought that to light, that, this is what's going on in the classroom. We want something different, and so here they are, but they have a lot of questions too. And so you need that. Let's see, what was the other thing I said? You do need a bandwidth that's pretty large. If you feel like you're already burning out on what you need to do, then this might be something where you either need to hire a part-time staff member that can navigate and manage your school savings program, or something, or find some things that you can take off of your plate, as Jamie said earlier, to give to other staff members who maybe do have an extra bandwidth, so that now you can accept what it's going to take. Because there's my bookkeeper is an amazing girl. She was my student many, many, many years ago. And I just texted her this morning because Jamie had brought that up about, your bookkeeper does a lot of stuff too that they didn't have to do before. And just finding somebody who has that ability, who is willing, she's got the login down on the Hope Scholarship thing, and I'll say, hey, are there any students yet who haven't signed over, their second semester funds to us? And she, at a click of a button, she has the names of the people, and she's just gotten so good with it that it's just been a gift from me because I can't do that. That
Yeah.
isn't in my bandwidth right now.
I think being mindful of what you can keep on your plate, right? Like what you can actually own, and then outsourcing some of that, just like a homeschool mom would. Like, this is only so much that I can do. I can outsource finding the support network and outsourcing some of that customer relationship with the parents and support, outsourcing to a bookkeeper for billing, and so that you can be the best school administrator that you can be. But just being mindful that participating is going to require some work and time, energy, resources. You know, you have resources, you could spend more time trying to figure it out, or you could spend some money and let somebody else figure it out for you and free you up in that way. Along with that line of thought, John, what additional supports are you seeing in Utah that families or entrepreneurs are needing to help them navigate Utah Fits?
So I mentioned this before, but having that organization, that association that you can maybe outsource some of this stuff to, you know, you can form a group kind of like the Wise, kind of like the Few, where they can maybe help you navigate some of that together. But I think that one of the things that I want to, I guess, caution with founders is think about your first year opening your school and how many things maybe you didn't quite get right that first time you went there. Maybe you didn't bill the right way. Maybe you didn't do whatever it was. These programs are doing the same thing. They're building, as Kim liked to say, that they're building the plane as it's taking off with some of the back end of some of these things. So by all means, like when you're having a problem, let them know, but also understand that, you know, they're new to it and they need that feedback. They need to know, hey, you know, I need the payment by mid-August so that we can actually operate. Like, if they don't know that, they're not going to work towards that. And so I think, again, making those relationships, I've said it in a bunch of my panels, just making the relationships with the people who know. There's groups like where I work at Libertas Institute who have the relationships with a lot of those people. So you can leverage those, you can reach out to them and work with them because they know the different people, or if they don't know, they know somebody who does know. And so that would be kind of my advice there is leverage the relationships you have. You don't have to do it on your own, but you can work together or work with a policy wonk like me and figure it out.
There's only so much time in these sessions, and so I do want to kind of open up for some questions. So let's do some logistical. This is a QR code for my information. If you want to reach out, email me, you can scan this QR code and be connected so that I can help answer questions that you maybe have had from today's panel. I hate to leave people, they leave the panel and they're like, I wish I could have asked this, or if it's a question for one of the panelists, I'll be able to connect you to them. This is the QR code for the 15 questionnaire, the 15 questions to consider before participating in your state school choice program. These are questions that you can actually take to the government agency, to the lobbyists who are working on the legislation. These are questions that you should be able to get the answers to if you're going to participate in your choice program. Again, if you need help navigating that, you'll have my contact information to be able to reach out. And on the note cards that I passed out there, I do have a course where I teach all of this, what we're talking about, from business entities, for-profits, nonprofits, how to participate. And we lowered the cost of that to $200 for participants, so you'll have $100 off of that, and the QR code to that is there on the note cards on your way out. So we've got just a couple minutes. I know we started late, so we're going to break the rules and go a couple minutes if there are questions. So we'll go ahead and open it up. Go ahead.
So Kim, you're transitioning from a charter school to participating in your state ESA program. I'm assuming you can't be both at the same time. Like, all of those students that are attending your school are going to have to participate, or they're no longer going to be able to attend there. There's going to be a line in the sand, a date that happens.
I can actually be both at the same time. And
Let
so,
me show you a chart that
And you
will.
just keep the data separate when you have to provide your accountability data to your authorizer.
Yeah.
You're just going to show them
Yep.
accountability data for the students that are technically enrolled in the charter.
yep.
And they don't.
No, isn't that magical? I thought I was going to have to start a separate entity in order to do them both, have separate classrooms, do all the things separate. But I don't know who created that. Was that Royce? Somebody created some policy somewhere that made it so that I, as an LEA, could do both at the same time.
Yeah, our public schools can participate. So if you can think about it as the student's profile, the student is either satisfying compulsory education, and I think Utah is similar. They're either satisfying compulsory education through a public school, like your charter school students, or they're exempt from that as a homeschooler or what have you. So each student has a profile. That doesn't prevent Kim as a provider from providing for charter school students through this charter network, and then providing for the students who are now Utah Fit students who are accepting the scholarship, also providing for them.
And there are things to think about with that. So for example, with the Utah Fits All, you can't also then turn around and take that student who's receiving that scholarship and
Right.
submit them for your
Correct.
school funding as them. So you do have to kind of keep that attendance separate. There's some administrative things that have to happen there. I had a conversation with Kim about like, well, could I provide those students who are Hope Scholarship student or Utah Fits All Scholarship students religious curriculum? And although I don't know that there's anything that prevents that, my advice to you, again, realizing we're working with the government, is I would be very careful with that as a charter school, because you don't want to damage your charter by doing that. And so there's things to work through, things to think about with that. But in Utah, you can absolutely do both.
Are all the ESA programs, there are no restrictions against religious curriculum? In all the
So it
states?
depends, it varies. Well, in California, they don't have an ESA, but they have a charter network that kind of functions like an ESA in a lot of ways. And because it's a charter, it does prevent faith-based curriculum. But West Virginia was, I believe, possibly the first to actually write into theirs specifically with a nearly universal program that the founders would not have to change their practices, they wouldn't have to change their admissions policies. So there was a protection that they couldn't restrict you from using it on faith-based materials or faith-based programming. And traditionally, what we had is more like the Tech Trep or the other charter network systems. That's what a lot of people thought of when they thought of an ESA that did prevent you from being able to. But what's passing now has that protection in it. Anybody else? We did such a great job. You don't have any questions? Well, thank you all for coming out. And again, you know how to reach out if you think of a question for the panelists. I'll be happy to connect you with them. You guys have a great